Hi everyone, and thanks for joining us this afternoon. It's 2 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, and it's wherever you are in the world. I have no idea. I'm sure some people are sleeping and they're not awake, but that's okay. Today, as you'll know, I've got Roshan from Equal 8 Finance with me. Hello, Roshan. How are you today?
Hi, guys. I'm very good, thank you. Thanks for having me today, and I appreciate the time that you've taken as well to sort of get me involved with this. Pretty stoked with this, and it's my first time as well, so see what I can do to help out everyone.
Yep, no, that's fine. The reason I got you to come online today and why I did approach you is that, I know that you're you've got a young family, you've got a son, I think it's 2 years old, you were telling me, and another one on the way?
Yeah, she's due in September, so I just dropped her there. It's a girl, so
yeah. Oh, well, so you already know. My day, we never did that. It was a big surprise. So, that's all changed these days. But the thing is, though, Roshan, you'd know what it was like and being arranging finance for houses and things like that, what it's like for young people, particularly when they do have children or even before that, to have to go through the stresses and the agony that would be involved in arranging that finance for their one big purchase. And, I mean, really, the house usually is the biggest purchase they'll ever make. Would that be right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So, when you think about it, a lot of people save up for, cars and everything else, but that's sort of like a short-term goal. House being a long-term achievement and long-term goal, it causes a big stress because, a lot of people don't know if it's going to be the right property for them, and, the price as well, and, especially with the way Sydney market's going and everywhere else, it's a bit sort of complicated. So my job's to guide them through it.
So, I put it out there earlier that we were doing this chat today, and there was a few things that I know we were going to talk about, but maybe if we just cover, say, the couple of questions I got from some people that sent me some questions, and I want to thank them, and if they get on the line, that's great. If not, they'll see this later when I share it. But Marilyn sent a question today, yes, it was this morning. She asked that she went to one of the banks to get a finance done, and she was told that she was okay and that she had the money or whatever they say. And yet then by the time she actually went to get the house and they did a valuation, the bank said it wasn't up to the right value, so she didn't have the money. Now, she tried to, whatever she tried to do, she said she was a very stressful time. She went through trying to get that changed, but in the end, they lost the house that they were looking for. Do you hear that happening much, Roshan, or is that a one-off?
Yeah, no, it's definitely it's a common factor at the moment, especially with the way things are going. So with her case, so I would say that the valuation coming in low is a big factor for it. So the way it works is that with the banks, when you go and have get a pre-approval for them, even through brokers as well, it's always going to be subject to. So it's a conditional approval. In her case, would be subject to valuation. So in a sense, hypothetically, she would have bought something for, let's just say, 500,000, and if the bank orders a third-party valuer to go and value the place, and it comes in at, let's just say, 450 or so, then either mortgage insurance gets involved or the customer would have to pay the difference in a relation. So that's what we call a shortfall, and hence why some of the loans and some people can't actually afford that, and that's when it sort of that's when it gets declined.
So does that change if they're coming to you? Do you have any sort of valuers and things like that? Does it change if you do it and they go independent, not to a bank?
Yeah, so limiting yourself with going to the bank directly, you can only have that particular valuation. So each bank will elect one valuer, whilst as a broker or any broker must they have access to more than, let's just say, 36 lenders out there. So we can do up to 36 valuations if we need to, whatever suits the customer. So for example, if ANZ has a low valuation, we can always go towards Westpac or even St. George, or whichever one that's going to suit the customers better.
Yeah. So therefore, if you're looking at it and you being in the business that you're in, you would have an idea of how things are going to be valued. So if you think there could be a problem, you can change it to a value that you feel will give a higher valuation. Is that correct?
We don't actually have control for the valuation itself. It's actually just the bank. But what we can do though, so once we get, for example, if I was the one that did this particular customer and did it through ANZ, and the valuation came in lower than expected, the first thing we can do is actually contest the valuation. So with that, I gather some of the recent sales in the area to actually back up the sale price that they've actually paid for it. And if the valuer still says no, and let's say we elect another bank, and the other bank says, look, it is on the lower side of things, we've got two recommendations where we tell the customer basically, look, we can either pay mortgage insurance or you are paying more than what you should be paying for in a property.
Right.
With that advice, the customers are pretty more than satisfied with that, and they'll make their decisions from then onwards.
Yeah. So there's more variation and flexibility going to a broker like yourself than it is going direct to a bank.
That's exactly right. Yes.
Yeah. So I hope that answers that for Marilyn when she gets online and listens to it. Another one I had was from a fellow called Dave. He said that he wants to know, does the process take the same time as the banks, and is it the same documents needed as a bank?
As a broker itself, I have to say our process does take a little bit longer. It's just because we check it thoroughly. We check it through the whole process to make sure that we put the customer in the right bank. So in terms of documentations, we tend to ask a lot more than the actual bank itself. It's just because we don't have those particular informations. We don't know if the customers, like their transaction listings, for example, we don't know what they're spending on. So those are the things that we have to gather, whilst the bank itself, they already have those information. But the only reason why we ask for more information as well is just really to give the customers assurance and the guarantee that, the money is going to be there when they need it.
Yeah. Yeah. So therefore you're trying to actually save them from a situation of either overcommitting and then, they might have their house and be in there and happy, but within 3 or 4 months when they're paying their mortgage that they don't have the money and it's not there.
That's exactly right, yeah.
So therefore, does it ever sort of change that if bank policies change that can hurt a customer? Does that ever happen?
Yeah, you can certainly do that. Like about 2 years ago when the government started stopping foreign buyers, for example, that played a big factor into the market because that sort of stabilized it a little bit, and a lot of the prices didn't really go up to where it's supposed to be. What that means is a lot of people who were selling wasn't getting the price that they wanted, and the value of the property sort of went down.
Right.
Yeah.
So so how did that affect? So did the banks then change? If their policy changed, did that mean people got hurt in the fact that they were either said that they could borrow a certain amount and it changed, or?
Yeah, so a lot of those factors are sort of for example, off the plan purchases. So you put a deposit in today, and then the completion date will be 2 to 3 years from now. So everything was okay on today's side of things. Like the bank said, there's no problems. But as the change in terms of the lending criteria and everything else, what they find is at the time of settlement, they can't actually get the loan anymore. It's not so much as they can't get the loan anymore. It's just sometimes at the bank they ask for more documentations in terms of the proof, and I guess they just really wanted to make sure that whoever they're giving the loan to is someone who can actually afford to pay it, and they're just not actually giving it blindly.
So how does that change if they were with you? Would that be different? If the bank puts those stipulations in, as you say, it takes so long for the finance to come through. And I know with my son's house, he built down in Jordan Springs near Penrith. And I think from when it started to when it finished, it went through so many changes of when it was supposed to finish. It was like completion date. Yeah, right. To the point of when it actually did. So in that scope, it could have changed for him and he could have shortfalled with the money. And because he actually went to a bank, he would be held. Whereas if he went to you, you'd be able to scout around. Would that be right? And try. That's exactly right. Right. Okay.
Also with the changes as well, obviously it's something that we can't foresee, but it's something that we can be prepared for. If there's a specific approval that we've done for a customer in a specific bank, and then that specific bank actually made some changes, we have to make sure that the customer is aware of those changes, so we'll be able to prepare for it at the time that the settlement comes in. Yeah.
Okay then. So I hope that answers Dave's. The other one I had here was, actually someone wants to know how they're able to contact you and whether they can just have a chat with you or whether they have to make an appointment. That was from Joanne.
By all means, look, my phone number, I'll have it written somewhere out there, but they can contact me via phone, on email, or even through Facebook, whatever's going to be easiest for them. If I don't reply straight away, please be patient. I'll be more than happy to get back to them as soon as I can.
Okay, so what I'll do after this is I will actually put your email and everything on there so that people can see how to contact you and they can talk to you directly about these sort of things. The other thing I wanted to talk to you about today is that, and as I mentioned, you know, my son just built a house. My daughter did too, actually. That when parents are involved in situations and they've got their children going out and buying these houses for the first time, and they sometimes would like to help out. Now, for me, I mean, I've got 5 kids, so if they all ask me, and if they're watching today, please don't all ask me, okay, because I don't want to get caught here. But the thing is that, is there a thing like, I know guarantor used to be something, but then some parents could be worried, like, oh, my God, what if they don't pay the loan? Does that mean we have to pay it? So what happens in that case?
So guarantor loan are still active at the moment, so a lot of the banks are still using it. The way that works is that really just using the parent's property as a security. So if, to sum it up, let's just say, for example, the parent's property has 5 bedrooms. Okay? And now their daughter or their son is going to buy a property. What we do is we hypothetically use that parent's property as a security. So let's just say one of the 5 bedrooms on the parent's property, we use that as a security for that particular property that they're purchasing, in order to actually borrow either 100% or just as much as possible to actually cover their deposit. The only downside to it, like you said, is obviously if they're unable to make the payments, if their kids are unable to make the payments, the parents will be liable to actually either pay those repayment or sell their current property in order to pay that one particular bedroom that they've assigned for that house.
Oh, really?
So that's how it's going to work. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's a sort of like a pros and cons factor. Like, you know, it's risky in the sense that yes, they can, you know, it can happen. You know, but it's a pro factor that, you know, they are able to help their kids. And most of the time, like, you know, we do the assessment based on like a buffer as well. And we do the servicing based on the parents being able to pay their current loan if there is one, and also the new property that the kids are purchasing as well, like their portion of the debt.
So in the case where, so we'll just use me as an example here. I lent one of my children and they want to get my name off the mortgage and I'm happy for them to get it off too. Have to wait till, as you say, that portion that they've, like it's not actually, is either got enough equity in the house that they've purchased. Is that true? And then can they get your name off it?
That's exactly right. So what we'll do is, like, let's just say, for example, a year from now, that particular house that they've bought increased its value. The bank, so we can organise a valuation to actually get to the place, and as long as it's within 80%, so there's no mortgage insurance of the total debt, then that's what, you know, we'll be able to use to release your name off that particular mortgage.
Right. So that way, that's sort of like a buffer for people or for parents that want to try and help their children out, that they can. Like for me, for instance, with 5 kids, if I was to help one of my children out and then finally they got my name off that mortgage, that would allow me to go forward and then help another child. So
yes, that's exactly right. But you can actually do 2 at a time if you need to. So just as
I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that, Roshan. Careful. You're putting it out there. I might have whole 5 of them with me in a minute, you know?
But it all depends on basically how much equity you've got on that property, and how much your lend, like, you know, each bedroom of your property will cost for their house.
So how do you work that with the bedroom? I don't quite get that. Like, I mean, I've got a 7-bedroom house. Does that mean I've got too much, or, you know?
Let's look at towards the value of the property. Let's say hypothetically the value of your property, I'm just throwing this out there, is $1 million, right? Yeah. So as long as, and then let's say one of your sons buys a property for $500,000. So we need to be able to cover 20% of their house, or the one that they're buying, out of your property. So that's $100,000 from their house, and then obviously stamp duty as well and everything else. That's 500. Let's say 520,000. So we require 120,000 from your house, which is worth $1 million, to be able to actually use as security. Yeah. So that's how it works. Right.
So now, does that cost me as the mum anything for them to do that?
There is an establishment fee on some banks, but in most
Yeah.
banks, they actually just waive it.
Oh,
So
okay.
I guess if you look at it in a way that if you've already got a mortgage against that particular property and it does have
Yeah.
equity,
Yeah.
it's definitely a good way to help out your kids.
Yeah.
If you have no mortgage against that property and you're physically holding the titles, I guess
Yeah.
it's better for the titles to be in the bank's hands than it is in your hands.
Yeah. Okay. So, talking about housing prices and things like that, what have you noticed? Have you noticed that there's any areas in Sydney that have dropped off and quietened down, or is it still hustling, bustling along and raising like anything?
Look, it's definitely quieting down. It became a little bit more. I guess it's still far fetched, but it's a little bit more reachable.
Yeah.
Places like, for example, Maroubra, I can
Yeah.
see that there's a lot more properties on the market nowadays, so buyers are able to choose a lot more when it comes
Yeah.
down to it. Like one specific sort of like in a street is Anzac Road in Maroubra.
Yeah.
There's a 2-bedroom unit there that's for sale it's going to auction actually, and I think they're looking for somewhere around that high 7s to early 8s.
Yeah.
In that same street, one just sold on Monday for 625.
Oh.
So it's kind of like it becomes sort of like the buyers, the vendors would need to be really realistic in terms of what they want to achieve.
Yeah.
If they really need to sell, that's obviously what the price of the property is going to be up for.
So therefore, it's I suppose the lucky dip of the market where it was for everyone selling or the vendors selling is that they just don't have that anymore. It's more now tilted. The scales are tilted more into the buyer. Yeah. So is that just a recent development, or do you see that trending more and going even further that direction?
Look, I'd say it has to be. I would have to say it's more of a temporary, result from the Royal Commission actually investigating all the banks. A lot more people are actually scared to sort of jump into conclusion and actually, commit to buying a property. You'd go to an open for inspection, for example, and the agents will tell you, look, we've got 3 contracts out already. If you're really interested in the property, you need to give us a deposit by this afternoon or earliest at the Monday. Otherwise, you'll miss out on this property. That's not the situation at the moment. The banks would still want to do a valuation, make sure that the property is actually worth what it is, that they're paying for it. So it's more I'd have to say, from what I can see now, the buyers have a lot more options, compared to what it was this time last year. But it's more just really some pockets of Sydney that's actually affected by it. And at the end of the day, if the buyer really wants that particular property, they'll pay the price that they want to pay for it. So it's not really something. It's going to come down to the condition of the property and how favourable it is to the buyers.
Yeah. Well, there you've got different buyers too, don't you? You have buyers that are going in for a home and their first home, or some their second or whatever, and then you've got investors. So, the investors probably would be more the people, well, look, it's price orientated. Is it price orientated with investors, or do they also look for what's going to encourage people?
It's a bit of both. The investors that I actually deal with, I tell them to make sure that it's an economical buy as opposed to an emotional buy. Making sure that if the numbers add up, and if that's actually what you want the purpose of it for, look at it that way. Don't look at it as if 5 years from now my kids can actually stay there eventually, or things like that, or I'm buying this because it's next door to my house now. It's that's really sort of that's more of an emotional buy. And when you buy something like that, you sort of get attached. You pay a little bit more than what you should be, and you're not looking at the you sort of lean 60% on the good side as opposed to that looking at the bad side of things. Okay, the numbers aren't adding up, or the strata fees are too high, for example.
Yeah, and I suppose when you look at it that way, speaking about housing, you either have the investor, which if they are investors, they'd have to have a non-emotional value in it. Otherwise, they wouldn't be, in my opinion only, your investments have to be really business-like. But then when you get the people coming into their first home, it's so emotional because it's such a big purchase. And I mean, I know when I walked into this place where I am now, and I purchased this 31 years ago. So it was, I walked around, looked at a few places. I know this is going to sound really strange, but I walked in and it was the smell of the property. It was like, oh my God, this is my home. And I wanted that home, So I suppose that's when that works for the vendors, it's really hard, isn't it, when you've got emotions in it for these sort of things?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Like, I mean, I can relate to you as well. When I bought my first property, the first thing I saw, I thought to myself, like, you know what, I can put the sofa there. My painting would actually look really well on this side of the wall.
Yeah.
My massage chair can go on this side. Like, those are the few things that I actually looked at, and I can relate to that. The emotional attachment to it, and from there, you sort of like stop looking at, it's a ground floor, or it's the neighbors are really noisy, the strata fees are too much. Like, you sort of become blindly about it, and you don't pick it up until you've started living in there.
Yeah. I've had a question here, Roshan. It's, do you give any tips for saving a deposit? Do you do that, or you don't?
I wouldn't say I would give tips into it. Like, I encourage him to sort of, lean on which way. Like, it's more like, let's say, for example, someone wants to buy a property for 500,000. Okay. We advise them that, you require at least, a good amount of, like, let's just say 10%, 5% to cover the actual, property, and 5% on stamp duty and legal costs and things like that. I tell them, okay, you need to save X amount of money in order to actually, get that by this date. So we ask them, like, when do you think you buy it? Because the moment we start, giving advice for it, it becomes more of a financial planning. And, some people can say, hey, look, my broker told me to spend only this much and then all of a sudden they're in hospital because they're starving to death because they can't, they're not buying the food that they want. So, we sort of like, give them a step-by-step plan to actually reach the goal that they want, as opposed to giving advice on how to actually spend.
Yeah. So the other thing I was going to ask you was about that deposit part, is that people, when they're saving for the deposits and things like that, do you usually find that they start to look for the houses before they have that deposit, or do a lot of people wait till they get that chunk of money in the bank and they go, right, now I can go? Or do you have both?
I actually get both of them. So, like, what I normally tell people is that, the only thing that's stopping them from buying is actually not knowing. And that comes through sort of like in every aspect in life. They don't know the steps in relation to actually buying a house, so they just never really, bothered to actually do it. People who are renting, for example, they just thought, okay, I'll just keep on renting, because I don't know what the steps are. I don't even know if I'm entitled to it. So that's where, like, I encourage a lot of people to have a chat to me, any brokers, to make sure that, obviously that they can do it. And then once they actually get the knowledge of it, that's when they'll sort of like, lean into the right direction.
And is there, like, the steps that you're talking about, is that something that you have, like, I don't know, something you give out to people, or do you have it written up somewhere, or, maybe that's something we could talk about on another chat? What is it?
It kind of sort of varies depending on the actual situation of each customers. So it's not sort of like a set standard. Like, some people are, for example, self-employed. Some people work for someone else. So it's like, it's different to each individual. But yeah, it's like, it's something that I can actually, maybe generalize and, put it out there. But it's very important for them to actually just know that they can do it. And it's like a lot of people say, look, I just stick to renting, stress-free and everything else. Like, the property market's going down, but like one thing that they got to look at is that the person who they're renting from also has a mortgage. So if the property market goes down or the council rate goes up, there's only one way that they can actually pass it into, and that's actually increasing the rent. So they need to sort of, be wary of that. Because I get a lot of people that say, look, no, I'll stick to renting. I'm happy with it, which is fair in some circumstances if, that's the best way to go on about it. But in most cases, like, a lot of people can actually buy a house. They just don't know.
Well, the last thing I want to ask you about today, and before we end it up, is first homeowners grant. What's happening with that these days? Is that still around, or? Yeah,
it's still around. So it's basically 600,000. Don't quote me on it, but 600,000 for apartments. That has to be brand new, and the customers will be entitled to $10,000 as a first homeowners grant, and for actual houses, it has to be up to 750,000 for a brand new house. Now, if you look around on the market, there's really nothing for sale for that much, and a lot of people aren't going to be entitled to those things. What I would personally suggest to them is that if they're chasing that particular part of the market, is that negotiate it with the agent instead. So instead of paying, for example, 650,000 for a house, negotiate it to 640,000. Try to chase it on that side of things, as opposed to relying on the grant, and then adding that onto sort of like their savings.
Yeah. Okay.
But yes, it's still there.
Yeah, it's just I think I don't know, because I'm not really in only to what my children say. But I mean, I think sometimes it's not as achievable, that first homeowners grant, as it was in my day when we had first homeowners grant, deferred stamp duty, and I suppose they were luxuries back then.
Yeah, and look, also as well, with the brand new apartments, a lot of people are actually leaning towards it just to be able to get the grant, but they're not thinking that the surrounding suburbs that has established properties already are actually $50,000 cheaper.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's something.
So just going outside their scope a bit could save them a lot of money.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, then. Well, look, thanks a lot for spending the time with us, and I think we've got all the questions that we've done today. Maybe, if you've got time, Roshan, we could get back and have a chat maybe in a few weeks about, some other aspects of this, so that if anyone's got questions, they can get back to us during the time. And, I'll get that contact details for you up on there as well. But otherwise, thank you so much for that. And, good luck with everything with your young family too.
Thank you very much, Olga. Thank you so much for having me. And like I said, if you guys have any questions or concern, please contact me. Thanks for putting in my details as well later on. And if you want to, I'm more than happy to do this again next week or a week after. We'll go from there.
Okay, then. Thanks a lot, Roshan. Ta-da.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.